All right, so good evening, everyone, and welcome. And thank you for joining us tonight for this session, Clearing the Air, a Vaping Harm Prevention webinar. My name is Maddie, and I'm the Health Promotion Officer here at Monash Council. And first, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we're all zooming in from today. The city of Monash is located on the land of the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Bunurong people, and we recognise their continuing connection to the land and waterways, and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend this to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So Monash is passionate about supporting the health and well-being of our community, and we are committed to taking steps to reducing harm from harmful industries, including tobacco and subsequently vaping and smoking. So with that in mind, I'm very pleased to welcome our guests for this evening's event, Associate Professor Michelle Jonganellis, who is a Principal Research Fellow at Melbourne School of Psychological Sciences of Melbourne University, and Elise Jenkins from South Eastern Public Health Unit at Monash Health. Our first presenter, Michelle, has expertise in health promotion, intervention development and evaluation, behavioural psychology and clinical psychology. She works across multiple and diverse health-related behaviours including alcohol and tobacco control, nutrition, physical activity and sun protection. Michelle works as a researcher and consultant for a broad range of organisations covering the not-for-profit and government sectors. She sits on the Australian Council of Smoking and Health and the World Federation of Public Health Associations Tobacco Control Working Group. Our second presenter, Elise, is the Vaping Prevention Partnerships Lead at Monash Health's South East Public Health Unit, with a background in speech pathology and health promotion. Her work involves collaborating and coordinating activities with partners across the South East of Melbourne to support communities, provide education on vaping-related harms, and reduce the uptake of vaping across the community. Our presenters are here tonight to take us through what's happening in the vaping space, discussing the latest research and insights, and what's also to come with legislation. So thank you for being here, Michelle and Elise, to help us navigate this topic. And during the presentation, if you have any questions or you'd like to ask, please pop them into the chat and we'll address them in the Q&A at the end of the session. So over to you, Michelle.
Great. Thank you so much. I'll share my screen. And I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the lands on which I'm located right now, so the Wurundjeri people, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. So I've been given about half an hour to talk about vaping in Australia. It's quite a big ask. Usually I can talk about this stuff for hours, but just want to acknowledge, I think it's really important, especially in this area of research, that I have no conflicts of interest to declare. I've never received funding from the tobacco or e-cigarette industries, and I've never provided any services to them either. So just a little bit about me. I'm at the Melbourne Centre for Behaviour Change, and we do a lot of research and education in the health space, but also in the environmental space. A lot of the things that I will talk about later on, there'll be resources that are available on our website. So I'll pop up a QR code throughout the session, so you can go to the website and get those resources that I'm talking about, either this website or my own personal website. So this QR code, I'm pretty sure, takes you to my personal website. I've got information about any papers that I've written across all my areas, but if you're interested in vaping, you just click on the link that takes you to the vaping section. And also research infographics. So any research that I've done in this space, we also create more digestible summary-based things. And then also there'll be some resources at the end on how to help teens quit vaping. And a how-to guide that I created, which is also available on my website there at that QR code. So I'm sure, unless you've been living under a rock, we're seeing increasing rates of e-cigarette use among youth. This is data from the Centre for Behaviour Research and Cancer in Victoria. And this presents sort of the quarter by quarter, really, e-cigarette use rates in the last month by various age groups. And what we can really clearly see in that graph was, that around sort of 2020, we started to see a really sharp increase among the younger age groups. So particularly 14 to 17-year-olds and 18 to 24-year-olds. So among older age groups, it's been, fairly flat, but still increasing, but significant jumps in those age groups. And that timeline corresponds with the emergence of disposable e-cigarette products on the Australian market, which happened around that 2019, 2020 time period. We were all very distracted by COVID, and these products appeared on the market. And there's also some issues with the products that makes them highly addictive, which I'll get into in today's presentation. So clearly we have an issue. Obviously, this data is just until 2020. We're still seeing increases up to 2024, but hopefully we'll see that slowly come down as the new reforms come in, which I'll also talk to you about. Now, what we often hear pro-vaping people say is that, well, we don't need to worry about this because not that many kids are using, and if they are using these products, they're just experimenting with it, and not many end up becoming current users. And what we've seen evidence, particularly in countries that have adopted a consumer model for vapes, and what I mean by that is they've allowed vapes to be sold in stores on the street. So places like New Zealand, England in particular as well. What we see there is that more than half of young e-cigarette users are actually still vaping 1 year later. So it isn't this, oh, well, I'm going to try it once or twice and then stop. They are still using these products 1 year later. And what we've also seen from some research is that vaping dependence has increased over time, especially among young people. So this narrative that actually there's nothing we need to worry about is false. We are seeing increasing rates of dependence and we are seeing long-term use. Why are we seeing increases in use among youth? I mean, here's some advertising for e-cigarettes. This is sort of very early on advertising, with blue cigs. And then more recently, although still about 5 years old, this advertising with Juul. So Juul is a subsidiary of Altria, which is a subsidiary of Philip Morris International, a big tobacco company. And they were really the ones that created the highly addictive products because of the nature of the nicotine in their products. And again, I'll go into that later. But there are, under freedom of information, the internal documents from Juul have been uncovered where those documents clearly say that they want to get this youth market and specifically target them via their advertising launch parties for new products. We also see well, not we, because I'm not on these platforms. So that's another thing is, people might not think that these products are being advertised, but it's probably because, we're not on Snapchat, or TikTok. So we're seeing this advertising, we're seeing social media influencers promote these products without disclosing their sponsorship arrangements. Often it's quite surreptitious. You wouldn't know that that's an ad. But when you speak to a young person, they'll say, well, yeah, it's absolutely, they might not even know it's an ad either, but they'll see that there's a vape in that picture somewhere. The other issue that we see with vaping products is a low economic barrier to entry. So Australia has done a really good job over the years of increasing the cost of cigarettes to the point where, essentially an adolescent just can't afford to pay $50 for a pack of cigarettes. Whereas when e-cigarettes came on the market, they were incredibly cheap and they were offered with discounts. So for example, here's an example of a website that's, offering 50% off, buy two, get one free, 4 bottles for $35 if you're after a mystery juice bundle. So these are all ways that they're enticing young people in particular to use these products by offering these sort of discounts. Then there's the product itself. So here are all examples of e-cigarette products. The cherry pomegranate one in the middle, or rather that device, it's called an iGet bar. That is one of the most, at this point in time, the most popular form of e-cigarette in Australia. Puff bars at the bottom there, that long thin watermelon puff bar that was quite popular a few years ago. And then we see sort of some other more kid-friendly, essentially, products coming on the market on the left there. I mean, it essentially looks a bit like a Minion. So the product itself is also designed to be appealing to kids. Here is some examples of how the product is designed to look like something that you might see in a candy store. And we know that there have been candy stores that have opened up in Melbourne that are actually selling these products right next to candy. So you can see that there's actually, how would you be able to tell the difference? Is this candy or is this an e-liquid? So that picture at the top left there with the various different products, you know, a lot of those products are actually either tobacco products or e-cigarettes. So we can see e-liquids, we can see nicotine pouches, and you might think that you're looking at a packet of Skittles, but what you're actually looking at is e-liquid or an e-cigarette product. And then there's what we call stealth vaping. So designing products, e-cigarette products that are designed to be hidden, essentially. So we've got a hoodie on the left-hand side there. So easily concealable if you're at school. You can just, you know, take a puff of your hoodie drawstring and no one could tell the difference. You have the jewel in the middle, which is clearly designed to look like a USB stick, and that's chargeable via USB. And then on the right, you've got what you think is an asthma inhaler, but is actually an e-cigarette product. Now, that product has obviously been reported to the Therapeutic Goods Administration, but this gives you an idea of how the product itself is being used to target youth and to, you know, essentially help them get away with vaping in places that, you know, we shouldn't be vaping in. Then there's the flavoring. So thousands of flavorings. I think they're up to about 7,000 different flavors now. These mask the nicotine and it makes the vapes really taste good for young people. So nicotine can be quite harsh, which is, you know, essentially why smoking rates have gone down. It's not a very pleasant experience for young kids. So what does the industry do? We're going to put flavors in these products so it masks the nicotine and they don't even realize the sort of the harms that they're incurring. Because how can something that tastes like blueberry or apple be harmful? So in terms of, you know, switching now to the health harms, that's what the sort of the product looks like and the advertising and how it's targeted at kids. But what obviously they don't want you to know is the health harms that are associated with these. So these products contain nicotine, obviously, but it's not just the nicotine in these products that's harmful. And that's something that it's really important to talk about because a lot of people think, well, if there's no nicotine in it, then isn't it just water? You know, we've heard some kids say, well, isn't it just like putting your mouth over a kettle? It's just like steam, it's just vapor. And this is a very clever way that the industry has tried to manipulate people is they've called it vapor, but actually what comes out of an e-cigarette is an aerosol. But by calling it a vapor, people sort of think that it's okay, that it doesn't cause harm. But even the non-nicotine products, it's actually the flavorings that are in there and the other additives that have been found to be very, very harmful. Organic compounds, ultrafine metal particles, cancer-causing chemicals. So we don't have any sort of causal evidence yet that these products cause cancer because they haven't been around for long enough. But what we do know is that they contain chemicals that have been linked to cancer in other forms. So we need to be careful with that. And that's one of the reasons why Australia has taken the approach that it has is, you know, until we know more about these products, we shouldn't be just letting them out there before it's too late, like the mistake that we made with tobacco. And then because of all these chemicals, we do know that e-cigarette use is associated with things like poisoning, lung injury. Like I said, they do contain chemicals that are carcinogenic, such as formaldehyde, which is used to embalm dead bodies. And of course, the nicotine in it can also cause dependence and addiction. And this is sort of what people tend to focus on, the nicotine, but again, it's all the stuff combined that causes those really harmful consequences. I do want to also note something that we've noticed is that non-smokers who use e-cigarettes are about 5 times more likely than those who avoid them to go on to become cigarette smokers. So, there is this, what we call this gateway effect, where these, colourful, flavourful products give kids that sort of taste of nicotine, and then they might go on to experiment and use tobacco cigarettes. So that's quite a substantial increase in risk, that 5 times. I just want to talk a little bit about nicotine addiction and how it relates to the product itself. So a standard cigarette, obviously there are different options within this, but your standard cigarette contains 20 milligrams of nicotine, and that nicotine is what we call free-base nicotine. Now, a disposable e-cigarette can contain 50 milligrams of nicotine. So it's obviously way more than a standard cigarette. And disposable cigarettes, e-cigarettes rather, contain what we call salt-based nicotine. So what does this mean? I mentioned it earlier in relation to Juul and what they did to the product to make it more addictive. And essentially, what we've noticed is that they've made it with salt-based nicotine, which I'll get into in a moment. And they've also created products, not just Juul, but also other organizations, have created products with thousands and thousands of puffs. So, the early disposable products, you could have gotten a few thousand puffs out of it. Now they're up to 15,000 puffs per device. Sometimes 20,000. So we really have adolescents who are addicted to these products just constantly, I guess, grazing all day. There isn't really an end to this like there is with the cigarette. So quite a lot of puffs that they can get. And so when we think about the equivalent, I basically ran out of space on my slide in terms of what the equivalent is for smoking cigarettes, but we're talking cartons and cartons of cigarettes in terms of nicotine equivalents, which is really, really concerning and makes you realize how easy it is to become addicted to these products if you have a 50 milligram product that gives you 15,000 puffs. And then just a quick sort of, if you'll indulge me, the whole free-base versus salt thing and what exactly I'm talking about there. Well, essentially the industry, and in particular Juul, realized that by adding acid to the nicotine, it reduces the pH. What does this mean? Essentially what it means is that it again reduces the harshness of the product. So here is an ad that I found for cheaper vapes. And it basically said that, these mixed salts are faster absorbing in the bloodstream. They give you a quicker, warmer, fuzzy nicotine feeling without the throat hit. And so children can then vape very high strength nicotine and it doesn't feel harsh to them. So they just keep doing it. They just keep doing it and they don't even realize how addictive it is because they're not getting that harshness that they said that's causing them to sort of essentially recoil like they might with a cigarette. So for parents on the call, if they're out there, but also for teachers who might be sort of wondering about children in their classroom, is my child addicted? That's a really tough question to answer. Here are some resources that we've got that I found from New South Wales Health and sort of various other reputable health organisations. When a physician might be asking a child if they're addicted to nicotine, then they'd be asking sort of, how soon after you wake up in the morning are you going to hit that vape? If you're hitting that vape within 5-10 minutes of waking up, chances are you're addicted. And we are hearing stories of kids who are going to bed with their vape under their pillow so they can just be constantly topping up. Difficulties concentrating, feeling irritable when they can't vape, thinking about vaping constantly, not being able to sort of be in a place where you can't vape. So, we ran some focus groups recently and we heard some people say, we went to the football to watch a game and my friend lost her vape right at the beginning of the game and she just could not enjoy the game after that. And it was really sort of tough for them to see. So they're the sort of, questions that you might like to ask your child to see if they're addicted. How often, how quickly are you hitting your vape after you wake up? How are you feeling? Things like that. But then things that you might see on the outside would be a child who's feeling irritable or who's feeling a bit down, who might be struggling to concentrate on their schoolwork, for example, feeling jittery. They might complain that they're having trouble sleeping. They might be a bit hungrier than usual. But again, this sort of focus on vaping and lack of concentration in other areas of their life. So I'll just briefly update you all on the reforms. So what is happening? Because something that the industry likes to do is put the onus on parents, on teachers, and on the individuals themselves to quit vaping. So they'll say something like, well, we've just created this product. It's up to you as to whether or not you use it. We are a legal industry, especially the tobacco industry. The tobacco industry is a legal industry. You can't stop us from doing what we want to do. Bit of a cop out. So what we know works is policy change. And so the government has introduced a series of reforms because it was really noticing the huge uptake in youth use and obviously concerns around nicotine addiction. So on the 1st of January this year, the government banned all disposable vapes. So that was a great win because these are the products that are the ones that really cause that addiction in children. From the 1st of March, what the government also did was ban the importation of all vapes. So regardless of whether they contain nicotine or not, it was just all vapes cannot be imported unless you have an import license to do this. So you needed to get a permit to import the non-therapeutic vapes, essentially. Sorry, import therapeutic vapes, but all non-therapeutic vapes were illegal from import. And then they also placed restrictions on the flavors. So theoretically, you can only get tobacco, menthol, and mint. Obviously, we would have wished that they would not allow menthol and mint flavors because we know that these are also quite palatable. But we take what we can get and we'll work on changing that later. Then on the 1st of July, what they did was they restricted the supply of e-cigarettes to pharmacies only. So all retail essentially should have closed overnight. Now, obviously they haven't. Obviously, we know that there are stores out there that are still selling these products to people, to young kids, but also to adults. So obviously we need to improve our enforcement efforts there. But again, theoretically, on the 1st of July, you shouldn't be able to access a product on the street front retail. You just need to go. You can only go to your pharmacist. You still needed a prescription though. So you need to go to your GP to get a prescription that said, they're prescribing this for you to quit smoking. And then on the 1st of October, so most recently, what happened is they removed that prescription requirement for adults. So if you're an adult who wants to use a vaping product to quit smoking, you no longer have to go to your GP for a prescription. You can go to your pharmacist and ask them for it, sort of like over-the-counter medication. Now, there are some states that are sticking with the prescription model. So in Tasmania and Western Australia, a prescription is still required. Whether or not other states follow suit is we're waiting to see. But certainly some states have still decided to stick with the stricter option there. What's happening next year? So essentially what they're going to do next year is focus on the product itself, the product standard. So for anyone who's interested out there, it's called the TGO 110. And so what they're doing then is from the 1st of March, they're placing restrictions on what can be imported into Australia. And then from the 1st of July, they're placing restrictions on what can be supplied in Australia. So essentially, they're giving people a few months to get rid of the stock that they've brought into the country. So that's why the supply laws are coming in a few months after the import laws. And so the changes that they're putting in place, things like plain packaging so that they're not allowed in colourful packaging. They're putting limits on the nicotine content that you can get. They're putting restrictions on product names. They're giving people information leaflets. So, you know, a few things there to, again, reduce the palatability and the appeal of the product, which is something that really engaged young kids to begin with. So in terms of next steps, what we are looking at now is nicotine pouches. So we are engaging in surveillance of any new products. The industry has an obligation to its shareholders to maintain its profits. So it's not just going to lie down and take what the government has thrown at them. It is going to come up with new products, and they're going to put these products in the market. So something that we've heard from adolescents and young adults is that they've switched to nicotine pouches. Nicotine pouches are illegal. Any product that contains nicotine in Australia is illegal unless it's a tobacco cigarette or it's a vape under what I've just told you. So these products are illegal, but they've surfaced anyway. So we're checking in with this. E-cigarettes, we're hearing, have becoming, you know, a lot more expensive, which isn't a bad thing. Like I mentioned earlier, they were far too cheap to begin with, but kids in particular who can now no longer afford an e-cigarette seem to be switching to nicotine pouches, as these products are being sold a lot more cheaply than e-cigarettes. So we're definitely needing to be on the lookout for that. You'll also see an increasing number of social marketing campaigns encouraging people to quit if they do vape, and sort of also trying to prevent people from taking up vaping in the first place. So we've seen some campaigns from Vic Health, from Quit, encouraging people to get the facts on vaping, telling them about the chemicals that are in the products, and then, you know, various other campaigns that the Department of Health has done federally, you know, around quitting and not becoming addicted. Then, of course, there's a lot of work being done to improve our cessation resources. So obviously, you know, Quit has been excellent at providing that support for tobacco. They're now increasing investment to make sure that they can also provide that support for vaping cessation and have that right information. And then, of course, you know, young kids often don't want to pick up the phone and talk to someone on the other side. So the My Quit Buddy app, you know, and other apps that are being developed with more text-based support. So providing that support in a way that adolescents really prefer. And then, of course, health practitioner training as well. So if there's a health practitioner on the webinar today, highly encourage you to check out the resources on the Quit website. I do want to, I've still got another section of my presentation, but I do just want to say, please be careful where you go to for information. There are a lot of organisations out there that are not doing the right thing, that are funded by big tobacco that you might not realise. So just made a list there of some trusted sources to go to for information that have not been, I guess, you know, infiltrated by the vaping industry. So I'll just briefly go through some sort of advice on, you know, how do you help teens quit? This is an example of the how-to guide that I developed that's available on my website, really talking about the, you know, the LAMP technique that I created, which is really around listening to your teen, acknowledging their concerns, boosting their motivation to quit, and then helping them problem solve, creating goals, developing coping plans. So this guide is on the website, and it's freely available. So you're welcome to jump online and download that and use it as you see fit. I'll just quickly go through some of the various elements of it. First of all is its motivation. So when we think about behaviour change, and I work for the Melbourne Centre for Behaviour Change, you know, motivation really is critical. There's a lot of things that go into whether someone is motivated to do something. It's usually based on some sort of story that they keep telling themselves, whether consciously or subconsciously. And here are two examples of a motivation story. So the first one is obviously a very demotivating story. I don't know how to quit vaping. Quitting's going to be awful. My friends won't like me. I don't have the skills. Versus quite a motivating story, which is like, I know how to quit. I know it's going to be hard, but it's going to feel good. My friends will still like me. And if they don't like me, they probably weren't true friends to begin with. And quitting, you know, I have the skills to quit. Quitting is consistent with my values and who I am as a person. So we want to get people shifting to be obviously the motivating story rather than the demotivating story. How do we do this? increasing motivation via knowledge. This is something that we probably spend too much time on, but it is important. And it is sort of the focus of the mass media campaigns. It's making sure that people know relevant information, that they understand it. So what is it that your child needs to know about vaping to stop doing it? So it might be around e-cigarettes containing toxic chemicals such as weed killer. The industries are using e-cigarettes to get kids hooked on nicotine. You know, what information do you think they are going to respond to the most? And you know your child better than anyone. They might not, go for a chemicals-based message. They might go for another one. So it's sort of like, what information do they need? Attitudes is probably where I think most of the work needs to happen. So, figuring out what are the costs and benefits of change, and does this match up? So you want to ask your child or whoever you're working with, what are the costs of vaping and what are the benefits of quitting? And you want to make sure you get their story. So of course, we know what the costs of vaping are to health, and we know what the benefits of quitting are. But what does that person sitting in front of you think about the benefits and think about the costs? What's their story? So if you're, something that I often say in my clinical practice is, before tearing down a wall, we want to know why it's been built in the first place. So if we're telling them you need to quit vaping because, it harms your health or whatever, and for them, they're really anxious and they're using it to cope with their anxiety without realizing that it causes more anxiety, we need to make sure we're aware of that. We need to make sure that we have strategies in place to actually help them cope with their anxiety, rather than just taking this thing away from them. So I think attitudes is something that we need to be spending a little bit more time on. And when I say attitudes, what I really mean is that cost benefit analysis. Because we know that young kids, here's some results from research that we conducted. We know that adolescents, young adults, even adults, that almost half of them think that using e-cigarettes helps people feel more relaxed, helps people calm down, helps people feel good, cheers them up, gives them a buzz or a high. So of course, if this is what they think, they're going to keep using the product, or they're going to start using the product. So we really need to tackle these, what we call outcome expectancies. When we looked at some research that assessed, what's associated with susceptibility to vaping. So these are people who have never vaped before, but we asked them, do you think you're going to vape in the next 6 months? And they said, probably or definitely yes. What we uncovered was that having the belief that vaping helps with your affect regulation, so helps with your emotions, was actually highly associated with increasing susceptibility. So if people thought this is going to help me with my emotions, they were more likely to say, yeah, I'm going to increase, I'm going to go off and start vaping in the next 6 months. So clearly there's an issue there around emotions that we're not dealing with very well. The mental health system is obviously what it is, and I can give another 3-hour presentation on the mental health care system in Australia. But there is something that we need to acknowledge there around potentially vapes being used as coping mechanisms. Here is just a decision to change exercise that you can do with someone. So what we know works with smokers is health, finances, and the impact on their family. So when we want to motivate people who smoke to quit, it's usually using their health, their finances, and the impact of their smoking on their family that motivates them to quit. What might resonate with youth based on research today is something around addiction and dependence, particularly the dependence thing. So you'll become dependent on this product. Impact on academic achievement, or more short-term impacts. So they don't care about getting cancer because it might be something that happens. And if it does happen, it's going to happen in like 50 years' time for them. They really want to know about the effects on the here and now. So it might be academic achievement, how others are seeing them. And what really doesn't resonate with them based on our research is the mislabeling of e-liquid. So telling them, hey, do you actually know what's in this product? That label isn't correct. They don't really care about that. And they don't tend to care too much about industry manipulation either. They sort of think, well, capitalism, of course the industry is going to try and manipulate me via marketing to use this product. It's fine. Normative beliefs is the next one. So obviously motivation is going to be higher if there's more pressure not to do something than to do something. This is really hard if, there's a group of kids who all vape. So getting them to quit then, if their family and friends vape, is quite difficult. So working with them to see if there's people they should avoid in the short term, but also, are they overestimating how many people who vape? And I think this is sort of an indictment on the public health as well, as yes, rates were increasing and we needed to do something about it, but did we inadvertently send the message that this is something that's normal? Because it's actually not. Most adolescents are not vaping. When we look at the percentages, only 1 in 10 are currently using the product, and only 3 in 10 have ever used the product. So we really do need to be careful that this isn't a normal thing. You know, not everyone is doing it. I won't get into too much with identities and core values. It's really just sort of explaining to someone whether their behavior is aligned with their goals, and who they are as a person. So your child might want to do well in school, but they're skipping class to go to the bathroom to vape. Can you use that discrepancy in their values to sort of highlight that to them, and how quitting might be aligned? I'll talk briefly. Sorry, I know I'm running out of time and I've probably gone over. Self-efficacy, lots of sources of self-efficacy. Mastery experiences are the most potent ones, which I recommend. So what I recommend here is set challenging but achievable tasks. So can they abstain from vaping for a day, or can they delay when they have their first puff? So of course we want them to quit straight away, but if they've become addicted or dependent to the product, they often need a tapering off plan. Again, I encourage you to check out the Quit website for resources on that, but giving them little mastery experiences to help boost their self-efficacy so they can realize that they actually can be on the path to quitting. If mastery experiences are not sort of available at this point in time, if they really are having some challenges, then can they encourage them to mix with others who've succeeded, to mix with people who've never vaped, or to mix with people who have vaped but have actually successfully quit, but also providing some really positive feedback, credible feedback, not overly positive, but credible feedback. And like I mentioned earlier, we cannot ignore the mental health issues associated with this. And so activities such as controlled breathing, normalizing anxiety around quitting vaping will be really important here. Smart goals, we've all heard about smart goals. Definitely set up a smart goal with your children or whoever you're working with. It's all in the resources on my website and on the Centre for Behaviour Change website. How do we set a smart goal? What might that look like? So definitely check out the how-to guide. And then just a quick plug for if then planning. So this sort of helps goals be met. So if is a cue, and then is the goal-directed response. So if I find myself in this situation, then I will perform this goal. So things like, if I feel the urge to vape, then I'll do my urge surfing exercises instead. So you're helping them identify a situation that they might need to change, and to specify a different response. So clear if-then plans can help boost or make goals more successful. And then also it can protect against emotional arousal. So if I think that change isn't worth it, if it's going to be too hard, I'm going to go back to my list of reasons for why I'm doing this and the positive outcomes for this. So making it really clear why they're doing that. Coping plans, really important. Keeping busy, playing games on the phone, doing puzzles, anything to help them ride that wave of craving that they might be experiencing. Obviously, I mentioned the decisional balance framework, getting out and about, changing locations, getting out of their bedroom, getting them to practice saying no to a vape is really important. So that self-efficacy to refuse a vape, having snacks and gum around for when a craving arises. Won't get into that, just important that they monitor and evaluate how they're going so we can see if there's any issues that might need to be changed. So good records, reward them if you can for going vape free for a couple of days, like have those rewards in place. And just remember that sometimes you're just planting the seed and waiting for it to grow. So, I know we expect there to be action straight away, but sometimes, we just need to give them a chance to do it themselves and to be self-determinant essentially here. So here are the resources on the website, obviously all downloadable, like I said. These are the ones on the Melbourne Centre for Behaviour Change. gives you an idea of motivation, SMART goals, and if then planning, and there's a few others on there. So please do check it out. And that's the QR code, and I'll end there. I'm really sorry. I think I might have gone over. I'll
I
head
am.
to Elise or Maddie. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Michelle, for that. That was wonderful. I'll pass over to Elise, just keeping on time.
Maddie, and thank you, Michelle. I'm not quite sure how I'm gonna, follow that up, but I'll give it my best go. So let's jump into my portion of what we're going to be going through. There we go. That's all up and running. There we go. So I'm here basically to, as a jumping off point from some of the things that Michelle has already actually spoken about, but really wanting to hone in on how to have those initial conversations with your teen about vaping. So to get going, I too really want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land. I am coming to you from, actually live in Monash Council area, and so I am on Wurundjeri Woi country tonight, and I want to pay my respects to elders past, present as well. So I'm going to be chatting to you all about a wonderful guide that has come through from Vic Health and the Behaviour Change Collaborative. And with that, basically the most important bits that come from this guide. So the guide was developed to really help make sure that you can have meaningful and really non-confrontational, non-threatening conversations with your teens about vaping. It's available both as a PDF and as an interactive online version. And all you need to really do is Google the Vic Health Vaping Guide for Parents, and it will pop up for you. I did it earlier today, completely misspelt it, and it was still the first one to pop up on Google, so it is very easy to find, and we'll make sure that we can pop something in the chat for you all a little later as well. So this guide doesn't put words into your mouth. It doesn't, give you a script to run through. Instead, it includes conversation starters, basically, based off the vaping behaviour of different teens. So you're going to have a different conversation if your teen has potentially tried vaping once and isn't really sure versus a teen that is vaping on a regular or semi-regular basis. And the guide itself has insights around how your teen might be feeling and thinking, and what the best things that you can do and say to help with that process and help with the conversation. So the guide splits the conversations that you'll have with your teens into basically a two-part plan, which is really helpful. So starting out with working out where your teen is at with vaping, and then identifying kind of what group, based off the research that went into developing this guide, that best fits for your teen. And then you can go straight to that section of the guide, find the most relevant information that suits you. So what we're going to do really quickly is go over the groups that kind of this research puts teens into, and then chat more about that two-part plan for how you can have these conversations. So this research that was done by Vic Health and Behaviour Change Collaborative, it's only been very recently published, and it has come up with essentially 7 segments created based off based off teenagers' motivations and attitudes towards vaping, as well as their current behaviours. So these segments were not decided by age, so it doesn't go from 12 to 18 or anything like that. Instead, the research really points to a need for the conversations that we might be having and the programs that we as some health promotion practitioners might be developing to be tailored to these different segments. So there are 7 segments in all, from rejectors on the left all the way through to really committed on the right. And we can somewhat lump them into basically 4 main groups for the purpose of how we're going to interact with them and have conversations with them. So we can put together our rejected and our uninterested into one group for the sake of conversations. The susceptible teens are their own group. Then we have our trialists and experimenters grouped together, and the attached and committed are also grouped together. The guide goes into detail about the different behaviours of each of the 7 segments, but we'll leave it at their names for today, just noting the time. The names tend to give us a bit of an insight into what we can expect from each area, as well as the images. But what we'll do is we'll jump now into that 2-part process that I talked to you about quickly, in terms of essentially how to have those conversations. So really, the things to keep in mind are that what you're really wanting to do is start when you're trying to work out where your teen is at by seeking to understand more about it. First off, by thinking about past conversations, past behaviours or current behaviours, or situations that you've been in before where your teen might have said something about vaping. Maybe they've gone, oh, ew, that's disgusting. Maybe they've commented on something in a more positive light. Just kind of bank that and keep thinking about it. You can add to that kind of thought with that second piece up on the screen about wanting to have a really calm and curious conversation with them at a time that makes sense. So we'll come back to calm and curious in a moment, but focusing in on making sure that the conversations you have make sense and they happen at a natural time. So we don't need to be sitting down our teens at the kitchen table in a really formal, structured setting, or knocking on the door and disrupting them when they should be doing homework to say, we need to have a chat about vaping. Instead of making it into this really potentially scary situation or really formal, stressful situation, do it more naturally. When you're sitting in the car at a red light and you see a pedestrian vaping, that could be a prime opportunity to just even make 1 or 2 comments or start a conversation. Perhaps it's when you hear someone mention vaping on TV or on the radio as well. So look out for those opportunities to start the conversation wherever you can and normalize it wherever possible. The third thing we can do to make sure that you can keep having these conversations is to not interrogate or judge them. So that's where it comes to being really calm and curious. It is easier said than done in some situations. We can all acknowledge that, but it is really important to focus on making your teen feel really safe and allowing them to share their thoughts and actions without having a preconceived idea of what yours might be. So don't tell them what you think and then expect them to come back and agree. Let them talk more than anything and just be really curious to know more. This is not going to just take one conversation. In all likelihood, it's going to take many for them to slowly but surely open up and tell you more. And it's a great way of talking about not just vaping, but other topics of conversation that are going to come up over time in a teenager's life that are really important. So some of the conversation starters you might want to think about could be how much do you see vaping happening around at school or at sports when they're practicing or at a game on the weekend? Some kids will see it really regularly because they'll be around friends or groups that would have a lot of young people vaping. It's also perfectly plausible that they don't see a lot of it. And so sometimes you're not going to know unless you ask. But that's a really easy opener to get that conversation going. And because you're going to be coming at it from a curious place and not from a I want to know names kind of place, that's really important as a way of kind of getting it going without feeling as though that teen feeling as though they might be getting judged or that they might need to be defensive about their or their friends' actions. Another conversation starter could be about, do you think vaping is as common as social media makes it look? Because what we see on social media is completely different to reality, as Michelle's already gone through with those stats. So it's something to keep in mind, and you can phrase it in a way, that question that hopefully makes your teen stop and think, okay, is everyone vaping? Because the reality is they're not. And lastly, a conversation starter could be around whether vaping is something that you have to go out of the way to find or avoid, depending on what situation or what location your teenagers are in. Maybe they can say, oh yeah, nah, whenever I go to the bathroom at lunch, when I'm at school, you know, there's people vaping everywhere. Or they might go, nah, never seen it, got no idea, wouldn't know where to find it. So these are kinds of things that you can start to have a chat about really broadly, really non-confrontational, just to kind of set the scene that it's a topic of conversation that you're comfortable talking about with your team. And then all of the answers to that over time can kind of help you judge where your team might be at with vaping themselves. So if you've been thinking about that, think about the conversations you've had, the responses, maybe the behaviors you might have seen them or a friend vaping at some point. Maybe you've found a vape when you've done the washing, who knows? But kind of put all that together and have a think about what we consider as a part of this guide as kind of part 2, which is thinking about the segment that best describes your team right now in the moment. So this is where we go back to those kind of groupings of the 7 segments. And there's kind of 4 that you can go to in the guide. If you're using the online guide, you literally just click, go to teen 1 or go to teen 3, and it will take you to the right bits. And in the PDF guide, you can do the same thing. It will take you right where you need to go. But it will take you through each of these areas. So potentially your teen doesn't vape, and they might be potentially quite vocal about being anti-vape. And that could be because they've tried it in the past and they've gone, ew, it's disgusting. It's not for them. Or perhaps they've just decided that no, the risks and the harms aren't worth it for them at this point in time. Teen 2, you've kind of got a little bit different. So you're probably more likely to think that your teen hasn't tried vaping yet, but they're curious about it. They might have been offered one, but quite possibly. We don't quite know, but it's a little bit more likely to be occurring. The third example really looks at teens that are experimenting with vaping. It could be regularly, it could be now and then, perhaps it's situational. It might be when they're just at a party, or it might be with a certain group of friends that they might not see as much. But they think they've got it under control. They don't think they're going to get addicted, that they can put it down and leave it whenever they need. And the last one is teen 4, which is those last 2 areas or last 2 segments, which is really looking at teens that think that they might be addicted, or they know that they are addicted, and they want help to stop, or potentially they're not quite ready to consider stopping because it might be a bit scary, or perhaps they've tried before and it didn't go well just yet. They might feel like they've failed, but they want to give it another go, hopefully sometime soon. So you can pick one of those. And what I'm going to show on the next few slides is essentially what comes up next. So how the guide works is you'll then click on the teen, the example of the teen that's most like your teen that you have at home, or that you know through work or social committees, whatever it might be, the local sports club. And it will have quite a few different tabs that will come up. So for this one, for teen 1, I'll just focus in on the more info section that's up on the screen. So it's just going to expand for you for all of the examples where the teen would fit into that spectrum of definitely not vaping through to definitely vaping quite regularly. And it really hones in on things like what you need to do as a parent, caregiver, adult that's important to their life. With the teens that are anti-vaping or don't vape, it's really irrelevant to the conversation as it continues on to convince them of the risks, because they're probably very much aware of them already. But what you can do is really reinforce that they've made a great decision and that there are some substantial negative impacts associated with vaping, and that by not vaping and not starting that process, they've got the best chance of making sure that things don't go wrong for them in the future. So it's also important to remember that just because you might have a teen sitting at home that is anti-vape or doesn't want to vape now, things might change in the future. So this is not just one conversation. You might need to come back and check in with your teen, you know, every 6 months or however often it might be when social groups change, when sporting commitments or social commitments outside of school change, and just see if they're still thinking along the lines of, no, vaping's not for me. Our next slide, just as an example of other content that you'll find within the guide, really talks about the conversation itself and the kinds of things that you might want to talk about, or how you might want to talk about vaping with your teen, depending on where they're at. So in this example, for a teen that might or might not have tried vaping, but you think they might be curious about it, then once again, it's really important to be positive and reinforce your approval, essentially, of their decision not to vape as of yet. It's really important as well to acknowledge that they are teenagers and they are innately curious, and that is okay. So address their curiosity with facts, and there are plenty of facts, both from what Michelle has provided and what I'll provide shortly as well, and through this guide in and of itself. So go with facts, don't go with fear. There is no point trying to scare a teenager into not vaping, because that will just make them scared to have more conversations with you in the future. But this guide does go into a lot of detail about how best to have the conversations and what to focus on based off who you're in a conversation with, which is really beneficial. Now, you'll also see on this slide, there is another tab about facts to know. And this comes across multiple of the sections within the guide, and there are some great facts to know. You don't have to know them off the top of your head, but they can be really helpful to have in the back of your mind, so that you can, if you've got a child or a teen that you know, is talking about something that you go, oh, that doesn't really quite sound right, you can do some myth busting with them. But also you can take the opportunity to go, oh, it really doesn't quite sound right. Let's do some research together. Let's look at those reputable sites that Michelle's just mentioned before and find the answer ourselves, rather than relying on friends that may or may not have the most relevant information. Another thing to look out for in the guide is the look out for section. This is the examples for it for that third teen group that are potentially dabbling in vaping and think they've got it under control. So a few behaviours to keep an eye out for, and some of which Michelle's actually also gone into, is if your teen's vaping for fun versus if they're vaping on their own. Perhaps it's they think that vaping is really good for them to help manage anxiety or stress. I mean, imagine, especially with school, VCE and things like that, you're probably at different points dealing with some very stressed teenagers. So keep an eye out for how they might be managing that and seek appropriate supports as needed. So keep tabs on what to look out for, essentially, and that will be different at different stages depending on your teen and where they are with their vaping. Lastly, each section within the guide has some wonderful resources. So whole bunch of links to all sorts of amazing organisations, peak bodies, health services, really high quality information as well, that so that you can be really sure that what you're reading is the most up-to-date and relevant content. So that is the parent guide. It's wonderful. Now, very, very quickly, now Michelle's already gone through some of these things, but you've got Quit website, vapingfacts.org.au is run by Quit, and it's everything just to do with vaping. If you want something that's a little bit more youth focused, uncloud.org is basically all the same awesome information, but from a developed by the Minderoo Foundation, working with youth and young adults to provide content that is more relevant to them. Of course, Quitline is there for everyone, not just a person that might be vaping or smoking, but for you as a parent or caregiver as well. They've really expanded the ways that you can get in touch and work with them. So all of those options are available. It doesn't have to be a phone call, as Michelle mentioned, because not everyone is keen for that. The My Quit Buddy app is brilliant as well. And lastly, just wanted to say as well that if you're looking for more individualized supports, highly recommend you touch base with Better Health Network. They are around the Monash area and out towards Bayside more particularly. They have a wonderful smoking and vaping cessation service with some really skilled cessation facilitators. And I know for a fact that they've got youth that attend their free programs, and they are very much worth linking in with if you need to. If from the other side of things, rather than an individual perspective, but from a group or organizational perspective, you're going, oh, I'd really like for my sports team or for my school or wherever it might be that you work or that you're engaged with. If you're wanting more supports in that space through more education sessions or things like that, please feel free to reach out. Monash Health have a range of options, which is my area. So working on more organizational projects and all the fun things from my perspective as well. So please feel free to reach out. No idea is too big or too small for us to give you a hand with as well. But I will leave it there with my email address and I'll hand it back over to you, Maddie.
Thank you so much, Elise and Michelle. That was absolutely wonderful information around all the vaping harm and prevention work that is going on in the space, and also great to know what we've got hope for the future as well. And a lot of things have actually come together very quickly over the last year or so with a lot of research as well, which is great to see. I just want to quickly touch on just one or two questions from the from the chat. We've got just where do we report retail shops that are selling vapes illegally? Michelle's popped a link in there, but would you like to just quickly expand, Michelle?
Sure, yeah. So there is a link to the Victorian government website. Obviously, enforcement is tricky at the moment because they're sort of still figuring out who's responsible for it. Is it local health officers? Is it the police? At this point, it is local health officers. So if you have noticed something that's not looking very good, in terms of the brick and mortar stores, obviously, if you come across an online retail shop, that would get reported to the TGA. But for a brick and mortar store on the street, you'd be reporting to the local health tobacco control team at the link I've posted there.
Wonderful, thank you. And also another one, what measures are in place to protect children and youth from extreme advertising tactics? Or if there are
Yeah, look,
any, yeah.
not much. Yeah, I've posted in the chat. It's really tricky because we're obviously seeing this issue not just in the vaping space, but also in the ultra processed food space and the alcohol space. And we definitely do need to be doing more in terms of digital, like regulation of the digital space. So obviously, the recent social media ban, it sort of helps to delay getting kids onto social media, but then when they are on social media, they're still being exposed to all this stuff. Like there's no regulation of what they're then being exposed to. They're just sort of delaying the inevitable, essentially. So we definitely need to be doing more in that space. But if you do come across any advertising for vapes, then again, report it to the TGA. The TGA is responsible for the advertising stuff. I've reported websites that I've come across. And those web pages have been shut down, or obviously they might pop up again. It's like cutting off one of Medusa's snaky heads. But yeah, it's the sort of the best we can do at this point. But the product advertising, things like the asthma inhaler, that is a blatant breach. And so yes, that stuff can definitely be reported to the TGA and they'll act very swiftly on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll wrap it up there. And thank you so much again for everything you've presented on this evening. It's been a wonderful webinar tonight. And thank you everyone for joining us. Have a
Thank
good
you.
evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Maddie.